in a flashlight. But we had it easy. I mean, it was only in the high 20s here in Portland, and we were only out of power for about a day. There are chunks of Portland where we're 3 days into this, still no power. But we're doing a good job of restoring it. But again, we've got a private for-profit power company that, you got to pay dividends to your shareholders. The various companies in Texas generated over $600 million in profits last year. Where did that money go? It went to the shareholders. It did not go to powering the line. So anyhow, we had this power failure here in Portland, and as a result, one of our Kroger chain stores, it's called Fred Meyer's, it's owned by Kroger's, the company that just pulled their pandemic pay bonuses from their workers. They followed what basically is not just policy, but in some regards the law. You've got spoiled food, it has to go in the dumpster. And they put it in the dumpster, but then for some bizarre reason, the employees of the store started guarding the dumpster against people coming to get this food. I mean, whole turkeys and hams and juices and cheese and a lot of stuff that only technically was bad. And there's this big uproar going on in Portland about it right now. The police showed up, and for a couple of hours, they prevented people from getting the food out of the dumpsters. And then the police decided, hey, this is crazy, and they left. And the people got the food out of the dumpsters. So kind of happy ending. But the bigger question that everybody is missing in this hot debate here in Portland about whether our mayor, Ted Wheeler, who's also the police commissioner, screwed up, or whether Kroger shouldn't have put it in the trash, or whether they should have put a table out in front or whatever. The big issue that's being ignored is the fact that we have thousands of homeless people in Portland who are hungry. This is not a problem that other developed countries by and large have. And it's a problem you can track right back to Reaganomics. For 40 years, we've had a homeless problem in this country that has been exploding. But somehow, our local newspaper, even the national stories, and it's all over Twitter, oh my God, the cops are terrible. Well, yeah, it was wrong for them to keep people out of the dumpster. Oh my God, Kroger is terrible. Yeah, that was wrong too. But nobody's asking the question, why were 100 homeless people down there looking for food? Or local residents who were trying to gather food from that dumpster to give to homeless people? Because there were some of them too. And that tracks back to a Republican Party that just believes in lies. And I'll dig a little deeper into that in just a moment. I published a whole long rant about it that I think you'll find really fascinating over at thomhartmann.medium.com this morning. It's really worth checking out. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And of course, that rant will reappear today on thomhartmann.com on our blogs, and Sue will be pushing it out in our free newsletter. And welcome back. Jared in, application must close, please check log. What the heck? I just got the weirdest failure. Let me try it again. Okay, can I put Jared on the air? I can. There we go. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. You are on the air, Jared. What's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk about this recent power grid failure, because this seems to be getting a lot of the news recently. I was actually talking with one of my coworkers, actually today, last night, about it. He mentioned that, and down in Texas, they got a lot of windmills and such, and that's why they got a power outage, because they're not used to cold weather like this. And I was just thinking for a second, like, is that really correct? Because I was like, for a second, like, thinking like, okay, yeah. But then I was like, wait a minute. I don't quite know if that's true or not. So then I looked it up, and it was like, 10%.
Yeah, it's not true. Well, not only that, a lot of the windmills that they have in Texas are Siemens windmills, S-E-I-M-E-N-S or M-A-N-S. They're made in, Finland, I think? They're made in one of the northern European countries, or one of the Scandinavian countries. and they work just fine in Scandinavia. Obviously, either Texas didn't appropriately configure them or set them up or winterize them. Well, it's got to be one of those three, because the storm that they're having in Texas, while Texas has got their hair on fire and they're like, oh my God, we've never seen anything like this. That's what they call Thursday in Finland.
Yeah, and I also read that they got windmills in Antarctica that can defrost themselves or something along with that line.
Yeah. Well, they do it like airplanes do. The leading edge of an airplane wing, there's two ways they do it. Some of them have a cuff that's like a rubberized thing that will pop the ice off. Others have heating elements in them that will heat and melt the ice off, although the cuffs are more popular because the heating elements will just spread that ice back against the wing. But they've got ways to do that. You can get windmills that are completely weatherproof. Essentially, that's, like I said, that's how they do it in all these northern countries that are getting now. Copenhagen is getting all their power, I believe, from windmills, or the vast majority of it. You can see them out in the harbor there. They're beautiful. But anyhow, back to you, Jared.
But yeah, I mean, and they can also get like heating for like, oil or, wherever they're getting their natural gas from. Because, I mean, you can't really like have oil flow if it's like cold and frozen in the pipes or anything like that. I think a lot of this has to do with like Texas privatizing a lot of their energy. It
has everything to do with it. In aggregate, all of the Texas utilities showed a $600+ million profit last year. They could have used that money to winterize their systems. They could have used it to insulate their gas lines. They could have used it to upgrade their windmills, whatever it may be. But instead, they distributed that money to their shareholders. So you've got a bunch of rich people in Texas who got big payouts, and that's it. Jared, I got to call. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. For our video this week, for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is, in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. So let me just tie this up and put a bow on it here. We've got, the audacity of these Republican lies, the lie that is being promoted across Fox News, right-wing media, and by the Texas Governor Greg Abbott, that the windmills are the reason why Texas is shut down right now. Texas's power systems are shut down, instead of the simple reality that they have known for 20 years. This is the third snow incident in 20 years. There was one in 1989, one in 2011. Both of them were investigated inside Texas by Texans. In both cases, they said, you guys need to winterize your plants. You need to winterize your natural gas lines. You need to bury them. You need to get ready for cold weather, because more of this is going to come. It's part of global warming. It's called climate change. It doesn't mean every place gets warmer. What happens is, as the Arctic gets warmer, the jet stream falls apart, and that cold Arctic air just drools down over North America. We've been watching this go on for, 10, 15 years now, 20 years? and it's going to get worse, and it's going to get more frequent. So, get your act together, Texas. Well, that's what they were told in 2011. That's what they were told in 1989. And they said, yeah, we're generating $600 million a year in profits, all these for-profit utilities across the state of Texas. But we'd rather distribute that money to our wealthy billionaire shareholders here in Texas than use it to upgrade, use it to buy windmills that are weatherproof rather than just the cheapest we could get. Use it to bury our natural gas lines. Use it to put defroster or however you do it with the nuclear power plant. I mean, you've got a nuclear power plant in Texas that's shut down because their cooling system froze up. There are nuclear power plants all across the northern half of the United States that never shut down. What's the difference? Texas, is it that Texas is stupid? No, it's that they're intentionally ignoring this stuff so they can take out these short-term profits and give it to their billionaires. We listen to these Republican lies, and it's just mind-boggling. Donald Trump's lie that in fact, he told it again yesterday on Fox News, that he won the election in a landslide. He lost the election by 7 million votes. He lost the Electoral College by the exact same majority he had won it against Hillary Clinton 4 years earlier, 306 votes. People, and people remember Trump saying, oh yeah, this COVID thing is just like the flu, it's going to go away. At the same time that he knew, we now know from Bob Woodward's book that he knew in January. In fact, he knew in late December of 2018, that COVID was coming and that it was worse than the flu. And he told Bob Woodward this in March or April. But he lied to us. And people are like, well, remember. They've been lying to us since 1982 when Reagan did his first massive tax cut, that $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion tax cuts are somehow going to help average working people. Trump got one, George W. Bush got two, Reagan got two. We've had 5 of these trillion-dollar tax cuts now since 1982. How many of them have helped you? Average individual wages have actually gone down since 1982. Average household income is about the same. It's up around 10%, but that's because now you've got 2.5 people in the average household working, whereas back in 1980, it was 1.3. I mean, these lies are just breathtaking. Now you've got Senator Ron Johnson, idiot from Wisconsin, saying that, well, that wasn't an armed insurrection in the White House. I didn't see any weapons. There's 5 dead people. You didn't watch those guys beating the police with American flagpoles? I mean, what's astonishing is not just that the GOP is telling these lies, but that 70 million people believe them enough to vote for Donald Trump and continue to believe them. And, in a vacuum, that would be astonishing. But when you look at the lies being literally repeated every day on Fox News, and if you think I'm exaggerating, go to MediaMatters.org and just scroll back through their archives, and you'll see that this is literally a daily event on Fox News. Or go to thewriting.com, THERIGHTING, The Writing, not writing like with a pen, but writing like rightwing.com. And every day, they push out a newsletter. You can sign up for it. It's free. There's no ads or anything. And they lay this out. I mean, this is not anything new. Back in 1980, Reagan decided selling the sizzle instead of the steak, the old advertising cliche, was the way to go in politics. And so he started giving us bromides and slogans and, Morning in America and all this other kind of BS, while in the background he was handing money to billionaires, gutting the right of average working people to have a labor union, destroying protections for consumers, deregulating banksters, setting up and deregulating giant corporations, setting up monopoly. He stopped enforcing the anti-monopoly laws in '83. He gutted this country. And we still have people lying about what a great president Ronald Reagan was. Reagan, for 8 years, just to get the homophobe vote and the so-called Christian bigot vote, refused to even say the word AIDS, as thousands of people were dying and an epidemic was spreading across the country. Pretty much identical to Donald Trump with COVID.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Here's the bottom line. You can have democracy or you can have fascism. Democracy requires the truth. Fascism only lives when there are lies. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan coworker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side, where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman. On the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Bandy Lee, Yale School of Medicine author of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, joins us on how Trump and other cult leaders infect their disciples. Plus, Professor Richard Silberstein, Chief Scientist and Director of NeuroInsights Research Program, drops by to explain the neuroscience of the creative geek. Have you been described as brilliant or genius, eccentric and or socially clumsy, absent-minded, and an independent thinker? This segment is for you. Tune in to the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm going to get to your calls in just a half a second here. Just hang on. Blair Erskine is, if I'm pronouncing that right, B-L-A-I-R-E. E-R-S-K-I-N-E. If you want to check her out on Twitter, she's, in fact, I'm going to follow her as soon as I get off the air here. She just posted it was a joke, right? She posted this presentation as if it was, and I assume it's her, as if she was Ted Cruz's spokesperson, saying to the camera, yeah, Senator Cruz is in Cancun right now, but you know, here at his office, we say, big whoop. Senator Cruz deserves to relax, unwind, unplug, recharge, you know, like you would a power outlet. And people think it's real. They think it's actually Cruz's office. But here, I mean, this is, from parody to reality. Dinesh D'Souza, you know, one of the reliable right-wing trolls who is constantly trying to own the libs, he came out, and this is an actual tweet from Dinesh D'Souza. He said, what could Ted Cruz do if he were here in Texas? I'm hard-pressed to say. If he's in Cancun, that means he's not using up valuable resources of energy, food, and water that could now be used by someone else. This is probably the best thing he could do for the state right now. Well, yeah. Having Ted Cruz leave is always the best thing you can do for any state. It's the best thing that could happen to America. I mean, here we have one of America's leading conservative pundits saying Ted Cruz is useless. And then now the story gets even weirder. Cruz contacted the Texas State Police and the Department of Highway Patrol, or whatever it's called. There's an acronym for it, and asked them to meet him at the airport on his flight back from Cancun, so he doesn't have to go through what Lindsey Graham went through, where people, you know, yell at you in the airport. He wants them to basically spirit him off the plane down a little stairway that they have next to the plane, you know, that the service people use, and stick him in a cop car and take him out of there. I don't know if the police are going to do it or not, or if they have done it or not. I don't know if he's still in the air or if he's already landed in Texas, but this is hysterical. CJ in Cibalo, Texas. Am I saying that right, CJ? Thanks for calling. Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. What's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing? This is Cibalo, Texas.
Civil law.
You took all my thunder with the Ted Cruz thing. It's like these people down here are getting a reality check on when capitalism meets deregulation. And everybody down here, we know what's up. We know that it's not the windmills. It's not a political thing. Greg Abbott got on TV that a couple nights ago and tried claiming that crap, and we're all suffering down here. I mean, luckily I got my energy turned back on last night. It's been on ever since, but there's some people who don't have it. We got people who are on dialysis. We have people who have LVADs at home and don't have power. It's not a joke. I know we don't get this down here a lot, but right now we're in the middle of another snowstorm. The city to my east is getting about a half a foot right now, and it's probably going to happen again. This is going to happen over and over again. Even the guys who run ERCOT, the top guys, one guy lives in Germany. You know, and there's
this is the Power Oversight Board in Texas. Actually, it's a minority of the members, but what is it? 3 of the members don't even live in Texas, and one of them lives in Europe.
One of them lives in Germany, yeah. And the other one, I think another guy lives up in Florida somewhere. But I don't know what's going on with most of the people out of power are the people of color, poor communities down here. I'm not hearing about anything like the rich communities like the Dominion and stuff like that. But we get weather like this all the time. It's not like it's been this cold. It's just the fact that they knew this was coming a week and a half out, and you know they didn't winterize nothing. You know they have all these windows.
CJ, they knew this was coming 11 years out. I mean, or 10 years out. 2011 was the last time this happened in February. I mean, it's been exactly 10 years since the last time this happened. And then the last time before that was 1989. And the power companies in Texas basically decided that it's more important to shovel their hundreds of millions of dollars a year in profits into the pockets of their billionaire investors than it is to take that money and use it to winterize their systems. It's real simple, unless I'm missing something, CJ.
Well, no, you got it right on point. This is the fact that we got a bunch of fat cats here in Texas who will just, rather than regulate, they just want to, legislate through profits, and that's why Ted Cruz left the state, because he knows he's wrong. He denigrated us he denigrated California last year when almost burned to the ground, and here we are, needing help 2 weeks out from wanting to secede from the union, which is ironic. Now we want help.
Right.
But I hope Ted Cruz already went out to the 5 apps and tried talking to him. His boards are full. You can't even talk to him. But if he hears this show right now, tell him, Ted Cruz, stay your ass in Cancun. We don't need you here. You're not healthy.
There you go, CJ. I get it. I totally get it. And thank you for listening to us there in Texas. I'm glad your power is back on. You're absolutely right. This is a life and death issue. From people who are on ventilators or dialysis, who need, the electricity to literally stay alive, to people who have, for example, insulin in their refrigerator that can't hit room temperature, or it degrades very rapidly. And that's probably millions of people in Texas, not just, tens of thousands. This is a screaming disaster, and it was all fueled by this Republican lie that markets solve everything, that government has no reason, no purpose, can never do good. It's just plain old flat out wrong. Thank you, CJ, for the call. It's great to hear from you. John in Redmond, Washington. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just curious, this is somewhat tangential, but if you knew about Bill Gates' new book that came out and how he talks about getting to zero emissions in 30 years, and his point is nuclear power has got to be part of that equation. And I guess he's advanced this TerraPower company, and they feel it's a safer and more efficient reactor build. Yeah. By using molten
There was a really
chloride.
Good review of Bill Gates' book. I read it last night. It was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times. And basically what they're pointing out is that Bill Gates completely missed the recent technological advances. Bill Gates is playing down the speed with which solar and wind are becoming less expensive, trying to compare it to Moore's Law, and actually they are becoming, in fact, the projections that were made in 2010 for 100 years out are where we're at right now in terms of the viability of solar and wind. 10 years, just 10 years ago, the predictions that were made, they thought it would take us 100 years. We are there right now. And that's completely missing from Bill Gates' book. Instead, he's going for these high-tech solutions like, new nuclear and all this kind of stuff that, may well just make the problem worse. I'm deeply and profoundly disappointed by Bill Gates and this whole thing. Anyhow, thanks a lot for the call. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind? Michael, I'm not hearing you. Okay, I'm going to put you on hold, Michael. We'll let Sean pick you up. He's on line 4, Sean, and find out what's going on. Fred in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I'm sitting up here in Bremerton. It snowed. Everybody got wet and cold, but we survived. I've lived in Texas, Tom. I used to work at the Houston Power and Light Company at the Greensboro Generating Plant years ago, back in the 70s. After they went on strike, I left and went back into the military. My point being on this call, what happens to all those illustrious Bitcoin owners that had their stuff in Texas storage facilities? I'm under the understanding that Texas encouraged them to come down and build their banks of Bitcoin servers in Texas because utility prices were low. Well, what's going to happen to all those people with the Bitcoins?
Yeah, there you go. Well, God only knows. I mean, their Bitcoin isn't going to go away, but your point is really well taken. Fred, thank you very much, for that call. I do appreciate it. Kurt in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. You were talking about the the workers that were guarding the dumpster of food earlier in your program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That just reminded me of when my grandfather was a little boy living on the farm in North Canton, Ohio, which is where Kent State University Stark State campus is now. There were people that were coming in from the city of Madison who were poor and came into the potato field and started taking potatoes from the field.
Was this during the Great Depression?
This is during the Depression. My grandfather asked his father, should I go in the house and get the gun? His father responded with, no. He said, we're farmers, we live out here in the country, and we have plenty to eat. The people out there in the potato field are from the city. They're most likely starving and have children, and as long as they don't take everything, I'm not going to deny them or their children a meal or
God
two.
Bless him. God bless him.
And
Kurt, what a heartwarming story.
For the rest of his life.
Yeah, there you go. And see, here we are. We're back in a second Republican Great Depression. And this kind of stuff is happening where the cops are guarding the dumpsters. It's amazing. Kurt, thank you for that. Thank you for a little bit of humanity today.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So how do you think we best get out of this? How should the Democrats most effectively call out the Republican lies? And when is the media going to stop letting these Republican lies go through? And welcome back. Tom in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. A simple question. You know what Texas would have if they had more home solar energy right now? Electricity.
They'd have electricity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if this situation doesn't call out the need for more renewable energy instead of less.
Yep.
Because
and decentralized power generation.
Yeah. If you had it and it comes straight to your home, and you have a blackout, you can get off the grid, you can power your home, you can power your battery. Any extra you can put back on the grid and help people. And also wind, too. The same storms that pushed in the cold and snow also would power a wind turbine.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's been no substantial drop in the amount of electricity being generated by the wind turbines in Texas from the stories that I'm reading. There have been a few turbines that went offline and provided a photo op for Fox News, but overall there's been so much wind that the rest of the wind turbines have been keeping up no problem. But I think the larger point here, Tom, from your point, and it's a brilliant one, is community power. I mean, this is something that you know, I wrote about this in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, that neighborhoods, we should be doing power at the level of neighborhoods. We should be doing power generation at the level of neighborhoods. If everybody in the neighborhood has solar panels, if the neighborhood itself has a windmill, you have a good storage system of some kind, and there's different, you know, there's debates about what's the best way, whether you through hydrolysis create hydrogen and then burn that hydrogen in a generator later on when you need it, or you know how you deal with that. But that way everybody in the neighborhood is invested in the same system, and if a system goes down, it only affects one city block or one, you know, area of 4 or 5 city blocks. And then, you know, if you've got a big grid coming in, the grid is like supplemental to that. But, you know, you at core, at base, you've got a system. And I don't know of any communities in America that are aggressively doing this right now. I know that it's being done in some places in Europe. I don't know if you know of any, Tom.
I've heard of it, and I've seen pictures all over, you know, saying, hey, look, here's a solar panel or a wind turbine up in the Arctic in Sweden, and it seems to be working. And I just went on a vacation over to Western Maryland, cross-country skiing, but what struck me is right on the spine of the Appalachians and the Pennsylvania-Maryland border was this big array of wind turbines. Now, it has to be 20 below there. The wind's pushing it, and they seem to be working all the time. Don't tell me they can't work in Texas, too.
Yeah. No, when Louise and I lived in New Hampshire, this was like 20 years ago, they were starting to put windmills up. And it's colder than hell up there. I mean, we were living on a mountain. We were living on Stinson Mountain, you know, a couple thousand feet above the ground, and it got really cold, and there was a lot of snow. And there's this whole ridge of out near Plymouth, New Hampshire, along Route 25, this whole long ridge of giant windmills, and they work just fine. But apparently Texas can't figure out how to do that because they got people like Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott running their state. And obviously Ted Cruz represents their state, doesn't run it. But, you know, same mentality, and it's really, really sad. Tom, thank you. Thank you. Very well said, and great comments to the point. Bigger question, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the fact that Republicans have been lying to their voters for 40 years? And there are still people believing those lies, and there's still media like Fox News and right-wing hate radio amplifying those lies. What do we do about that? 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the people who are, you know, supporters of our program, and it's about how the Democrats can never lose an election again. The people who are concerned about immigration, who are supporting Donald Trump's wall, or just are concerned about immigration and how illegal immigration has hurt the union movement in the United States, and it has to some extent, are gettable, as it were. I mean, about maybe a third of them are actually just racist. Leave those people to Trump. You're never going to change them. But the people who are just concerned about the economics of it, and of, you know, having a labor market that's not regulated, I think that there's a very simple way that the Democrats can reach out to them, get their support, and peel them off the Republicans, peel them away from Donald Trump. And I lay the whole thing out. I think it's a very straightforward process. It's not rocket science, so you can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. Jose in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Jose, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Good morning or afternoon, I guess. But I was just listening, and the general, how do we beat these Republican lies? We're never really going to be able to out BS really good BSers, which they are. But what Democrats can do is develop their agenda, their progressive agenda, put it into action, and let the results speak for themselves. Because if you would just yelling, screaming back and forth isn't going to do it, but an agenda that's working for the people will. You know, I mean, when
Completely agree with you,
people are
Jose.
acting-
That's why we need to end the filibuster, so they can actually do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we need to look at what we've got to do to get the agenda that's needed done, so that people can walk away from the garbage that is being told to them. Lies are easy to believe, and truth is hard to swallow. So, you know, we have to make truth palatable.
I agree.
Yes, that's
very
all.
well said, Jose. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hey, Jeff, your thoughts?
Well, Tom, I'm living here in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and the 2 mornings ago it was minus 28 below zero here in Fort Dodge.
Whoa!
And minus 33 degrees, actual temperature in Denison, Iowa, and we have windmills all over. And
they're not frozen up?
No, I don't. Not that I know of. We've had them for years here. Mid-American Energy, which is my local energy company here in Fort Dodge, they, on a windy day, can generate virtually all their customers' power, which is about 69,000 homes and businesses, I believe, on wind energy. So this thing about, you know, even talking about Finland and Norway, and we're right here in Iowa, and we are one of the biggest states in the the biggest power producers in the United States of wind-generated energy. And we also build our own windmills at Newton, Iowa, where the Maytag plant went out of business, and now there is a windmill plant there.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that. Jeff, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And if I may respectfully offer a warning to you, Jeff, if any guys from Texas show up claiming to be windmill engineers, run them out of town.
I tell you what, like I said, that's been one of the biggest things, and now my energy company is going from the windmills, we're trying to go to the solar panels. So, like I said, it's happening here in Iowa in the Midwest, and don't let them tell you it doesn't get cold here, because, like I say, it was 28 below zero actual temperature here, and the wind chill was probably about 40 below.
Somebody needs to tell Tucker Carlson. It's so sad that those lies are spreading. Jeff, thank you for the call. Craig in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Craig, what's up?
Hello. Something tells me after what happened yesterday, you're going to have a nice boost in your ratings.
Why is that?
And I called because of your statements with regard to tax cuts.
Yep.
Republican and Democrats have made big tax cuts to counter a phenomenon known as bracket creep, where as people make more money, they go into higher brackets, and the government has taken a larger portion of money out of the private economy. So
yeah, which is a reasonable argument for changing tax brackets below certain thresholds. But that is not any kind of reasonable argument whatsoever for dropping the top tax bracket, which stabilizes our economy, from 74% when Reagan came into office down to 25%, which is where he took it in about 3.5 years. He had to raise it back up himself into the low 30s just because it was gutting our economy and government income. My complaint is not that somebody earning $40,000 who goes into $43,000 suddenly has to pay an extra $40 a month or a year or whatever it may be in income taxes, and we should adjust that bracket. I'm fine with that, Craig, and I don't think anybody disputes that. My complaint is the top tax brackets, the very top tax brackets. They're not adjusted for bracket creep. They're blown away. They're nuked. They've been taken off the table. You've got corporations that were paying a third of the entire federal budget in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that are now paying 6% of the federal budget. You've got company after company that's paying no taxes at all. I mean, it's nuts. In fact, I'm going to dig into that in some more depth, I think, tomorrow. But in fact, here I can tell you right now, this is not it. I've got a list here somewhere of the companies that are not paying income taxes. Amazon's at the top of the list. Not only not paying income taxes, they're getting huge piles of federal money back. And there's like hundreds of them. And, you know, Donald Trump, of course, was at the front of that line. So, Craig, I get it. I get your argument. And it's the argument Republicans have made for years and years and years. And yeah, let's adjust our tax code for bracket creep. No dispute there. But blowing away the top tax brackets, which is what's been done over and over and over again, is what Trump did too? No, I don't think that works. In fact, I know it doesn't work. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. Revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised themselves and the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous feudal and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability of capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's also available now as an ebook. Democracyatwork.info, rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, PROFWOLFF. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering, Joe Biden, this $1.9 trillion bill is, about to come out of the House. And already the Republicans and Lawrence Summers and other idiots like him are out there going, oh, it's going to cause inflation. Don't forget the 1970s. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, it's dishonest. There's really no nice way of saying this. Look, here's the basic economics. If you're going to pump a great deal of money into the economy pretty quickly in a short amount of time, there is always a risk that that extra money will start chasing goods, land, buildings, products of our factories, and so on. And if that happens, and if there's more money chasing goods than there are goods, then the people with the money will bid up the price because there isn't enough goods to give everybody satisfaction. In other words, prices could rise. That's always a risk. But there is many factors that go into determining whether that risk will be realized. For example, if you have a surge in output of goods and services that happens more or less at the same time as the extra money, there's no need for an inflation. In other words, the extra money will be met by extra goods, and there'll be no rationale or incentive to raise the prices. Likewise, if the position of the United States in the rest of the world in terms of exports and imports were to change for any one of 100 different reasons, that could negate the impact of extra money on the price level. To say this particular increase in the money supply or in the deficits that the government runs to fund, for example, President Biden's program, this will cause inflation. They don't know that. It is false to say that you can tell this in advance. It depends on very many other circumstances. And here's two more key issues. We've been pumping money into the economy at unprecedented rates since as far back as 2000, and certainly since the crash of 2008. People then predicted it might cause an inflation, or if they got carried away, they insisted that it would. Well, it didn't, because other factors intervened, all kinds of them, and it didn't happen. There's no reason to wonder about that now in terms of predicting the future. And the dishonesty comes in when Mr. Summers or the Republicans or conservative Democrats begin to fight against Mr. Biden's effort to have the government finally help the American people by predicting these terrible outcomes. They know better. They know that for every historical example where extra money led to an inflation, there are other examples where it did not. And unless they have a crystal ball that predicts the future, they don't know any better than the rest of us whether that will happen. They're using a possibility, pushing it as a certainty for their political ends, which is to block Biden from doing the kinds of bold interventions that many of us think are already urgent needs.
Yeah, amen. So it's two things. It seems to me, first of all, that one of the things that produces inflation, as you said, is more money chasing goods and services than there are, and one of the major factors that produced the hyperinflation that we saw, or the high inflation anyway, in the late 70s and early 80s. Was the consequence of the late, actually it started I think in the late 60s, was the consequence of the Arab oil embargo, which reduced the supply of oil in the United States and thus bid up the price massively. And because pretty much everything in our economy operates on oil, that inflation from that oil price spike, in fact there were two of them, there were two different times that the Arabs cut us off, kind of echoed through the economy. And it seems that a parallel to that, to use your example, is if you're putting money in at the bottom up, average working people just going out and buying a lunch at McDonald's or a new pair of jeans is not going to create that kind of inflation. But if you do it from the top down, like Trump did with a $1.5 trillion tax cut for billionaires, they're going to put that money in the stock market, and the stock market has been exploding since we had the Bush tax cuts and the Trump tax cuts. And it looks like that might be kind of a local island of inflation. I'm wondering if you could address those two things in the 3.5 minutes we have left.
Absolutely. That's where all this money has gone. That's part of the reason why there hasn't been an inflation in the way these conservatives predict in goods, in buildings, in land, and all of that, because the money went into the hands of people who don't buy goods and services, but who use their money instead to move pieces of paper amongst them, bidding up their prices and collecting the capital gains. So we have had an inflation, only it's been limited to the stock market. And the joke is that the very inflation that the money supply increase caused is then used not as a problem, but as a sign that the quote-unquote economy is healthy, which it is not a sign of, but Trump used it that way, hopefully, counting on Americans not understanding the logic here. Yeah, if you help people at the bottom, not only are you helping the people who need it most, but you are also making it maximally likely that if people at the bottom have more money to spend, the decision of businesses, stores, for example, will be to say, okay, with my customers having more money in their pocket because the government helped them, I can order more goods and services to sell to them. That will get you the extra output. That will avoid an inflation. And by the way, that will also create many more jobs than moving paper around the stock market ever could or ever did.
So did the Arab oil embargoes produce the inflation of the 70s and 80s, or were there other factors?
There were both. They are among the many factors. If you increase the money supply a great deal at the same time that for other reasons the price of something like oil is going up, then you have two factors, both of which together might be able to generate an inflation that neither of them could by themselves. The parallel example now is the fact that we are more and more dominated by monopolies in the communications industry, in the finance industry, in the oil industry, and so on. And those monopolists are pushing up prices. That's one of the reasons Amazon and things like that are doing so well. And as that filters through, now that everybody uses the Amazon, the Microsoft, the Apple, and so on, then you could have that push from the prices going up because these monopolists are able to do now across the board what the oil business did back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So the solution, it appears, is that we need to get money into the hands of people who are in need and stop pouring it into the money bins of the rich.
Yes, and here's an irony you might enjoy, and your audience as well. The last time a president realized that he had to stick money into the economy, but he didn't want to risk an inflation, the man's name, which may surprise you, was Richard Nixon. And what he did was to create a wage price freeze. If you pump in money, but you forbid businesses to raise prices, you guarantee that the extra money will generate more product because you've blocked out the route of inflation to the businesses who make those decisions.
Amazing. Professor Richard Wolff, I always learn something from you. Thanks so much for dropping by.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann
We'll
Program.
be back with... We will be back in just a moment. Professor Wolff, you can check out his websites at democracywork.info and rdwolf.com. Tweet him at Prof. Wolf. And welcome back. Ron in Encino, California. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the big lie that's been going on around the world through the form of foreign aid for the last 60 years. We've forced governments around the world in Africa to stop all their companies and privatize everything, social services, all this stuff. So we perfected that for 60 years, and now we've turned it on ourselves, the corporations.
You know why Reagan was taking, Reagan was selling weapons to Iran in exchange for holding the U.S. hostages to screw Jimmy Carter. And then he took that money and he sent it down to right-wing death squads in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. And the reason he was doing that was because all three of those countries had governments that wanted to provide national health care systems, and free college education. That was at the core of what they were proposing. And we went in and destabilized these three countries for that reason. And so, yeah, Ron, I'm totally with you. And you know, it's just it's a horrible thing. And I think it needs to be pointed out more often.
We've run out of countries, and now we're doing it to ourselves. We're letting the corporations do the same thing.
Yeah.
But a dictator.
First we ate the weak, now we're eating ourselves.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm with you.
Tom.
Ron, thank you. Thank you. It's great to hear from you. Jake in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hey, thanks for putting me on, Tom. I've got a quick question for you. When you were talking about Kroger and its poor folks trying to get that food, I was wondering, you referred to other countries didn't have that problem. I assume you were speaking of other democracies around the world, like maybe Norway,
Correct.
Sweden, somewhere like that. What do they do to minimize the wealth inequality in those countries?
They have a top tax rate in Germany, France, all across Scandinavia that's over 50%. So very wealthy people, when they start getting close to that tax bracket, stop taking income and keep that money in their businesses and pay their people better. They have higher wage. They have heavy rates of unionization. I mean, in large parts of Northern Europe, you've got unionization rates around 80%. At its peak in the United States in 1980, we were at about 30%. And those things collectively balance the power of great wealth. And also, they don't allow money into politics. They don't allow billionaires to own their politicians. And so those are the things in aggregate that basically minimize wealth inequality. Did I answer your question, Jake?
Yeah, pretty much. It seems to me that maybe there's some way that we could, you know, we independent types and maybe some of the Democrats would be willing to offer up in my mind, be a constitutional amendment that says, in effect, we the people through our elected representatives shall rule the USA.
Yeah.
I've got 7 points listed, and I'm sure you could add at least 100 more to it that they would be, you know, our legislators would be forced to, you know, consider those items.
To represent the people. Yeah. Yeah, Jake, that's the essence of H.R. 1, which the right-wingers are getting hysterical about. H.R. 1 and SB 1, are, you know, the For the People Act, which guarantees democracy in America, are being fought by the billionaire class tooth and nail, and they will probably drop next week in Congress. Jake, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. We have a video at thomhartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, you know, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords, and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, you know, brought two Republicans into Congress. I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 21 minutes past the hour. We were talking a little bit ago about, you know, somebody called up and said, well, you know, we have to lower taxes to deal with bracket creep. And yeah, I don't disagree in principle. And I mentioned that I had a list of, you know, who's paying taxes and who isn't. This is from publicintegrity.org. and the Center for Public Integrity. They have a newsletter that you can sign up for. It's free. There's no ads or anything. In fact, I'm on their list, which is how I got this. They point out that last year, actually looking at 2018, that's the last year that we can look at the tax returns for companies that were filed in 2019. Because you filed the year after. So we're looking at 2018, and these companies collectively made 79, and I'm going to go through the list of companies in a minute, collectively made $79 billion in U.S. pre-tax income. Now, if you made even $50,000, $100,000, I mean, if you made some money, some serious money, you would have to pay taxes on it. If you make $10,000 or $15,000, you have to pay taxes on it. You'll recall Ronald Reagan doubled the payroll tax on working class people in order to help fund his $1 billion tax cut for rich people. So they made $79 billion in income, in profits. And they should have paid at the 21% corporate tax rate on that $79 billion. They should have paid $16 billion in taxes, right? $1 million, 16,000 times. But that's not what happened. Instead, they blew a $20 billion hole in the federal budget by not paying their taxes. And here's the list. It's very straightforward. Amazon.com made $10 billion in profits. And instead of paying taxes, they received money back from the federal government. Their tax rate was a negative 129%. Delta Airlines made $5 billion in income. Their effective tax rate was minus 4%. Amazon's was minus 1%. Excuse me, I misspoke. Minus 1%. Delta Airlines was minus 4%. Chevron made $4.5 billion in profits. They got money back too. Their effective tax rate was minus 4%. See, let's say you made $10,000 last year and your effective tax rate was minus 1%, you would have gotten $100 from the government, not paid to the government, but from the government. Well, here Chevron got minus 4%. General Motors made $4.3 billion in profits in 2018. Their effective tax rate minus 2%. They got money back from the federal government. EOG Resources, minus 7% tax rate. Occidental Petroleum, big oil producer, minus 1%. Honeywell International, $2.8 billion in profits. Not in income, in profits. Which is mind-boggling when you think about it. Or not in revenue, but in income, in the actual profits. Minus 1%. Deere, right? They make tractors and things, I believe. $2.1 billion in income, minus 12% taxes. American Electric Power, $1.9 billion in income, minus 2% taxes. Principal Financial, big banking and whatnot, $1.6 billion in income, minus 3% income. In other words, every single one of these companies, instead of paying taxes, you and I, out of our tax dollars, we paid them through the federal government. Prudential Financial, they made $1.4 billion in income. They received back, they got an effective negative 24% tax rate. Xcel Energy, I believe they own nuclear power plants, among other things. $1.4 billion in revenue, minus 2% tax rate. Devon Energy, another giant, $1.2 billion in revenue, minus 1% income tax. DTE Energy, $1.2 billion in income, minus 1% tax rate. Halliburton made over $1 billion after Dick Cheney saved them with all these corrupt no-bid contracts for the war in Iraq that he lied us into. They made over $1 billion, and again, you and I paid Halliburton through our tax dollars. Their effective tax rate was minus 2%. Netflix, $800 million in income. Effective tax rate minus 3%. Whirlpool, $717 million in income. Effective tax rate minus 10%. Eli Lilly, the big drug maker, $598 million in income. This is the money left over. What tax did they pay? Nothing. They got back minus 9. They got back 9% of that. You and I paid Eli Lilly. IBM got back 68% of the $500 million they showed in profits. They didn't, they got money on top of that profit. All of these companies got to keep all of their profit, plus you and I with our tax dollars subsidized them. And the list goes on. IBM, Goodyear Tire, Penske Automotive, Aramark, AECOM Technology, Tech Data, Performance Food Group, Aero Electronics, on it goes. The source is the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Mind-boggling.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And people wonder why when Donald Trump says he's going to tax the rich, and Bernie Sanders says, I'm going to tax the rich, people get excited about it and vote for them.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And it's just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line. And how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here. And Kurt in Anchorage, Iowa. Hey, Kurt, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just called I heard your previous caller from Iowa talking about wind turbines, and let's be clear, they're not windmills. We're not grinding grain. They're wind turbine generators. We're making electricity here. I guess you could kind of call me an expert. I work in the field. Talk about some of the lies that are coming out from Texas and on Fox News. Yes, it was correct. We were at minus 28 last week and wind chills to 40 to minus 50, and our turbines kept running because our customers bought the cold weather packages to keep them running. And there's a lot involved in software and particular greases we use for these to keep them running in cold weather. But I have a friend who's working, 10 miles from the Canadian border in North Dakota, and his weren't, if they wouldn't work there, they wouldn't work anywhere in the winter.
So is the deal, Kurt, that if you get, if you buy a generic wind turbine for a warm climate, it has a different kind of grease that doesn't work as well when, that presumably thickens up when it gets really, really cold, and that Texas just went for the cheap stuff rather than the winterization package? Or is there a special, is there something, is it more complicated than that?
It's a little more complicated than that. Yeah, there's a lot of, we have, it's kind of basically like a heat tape, that you, all the plumbing lines on the gearbox, which has all the oil in it to keep you got to keep the gearbox warm, and yes, and the generator, you keep that, but there's a package, and, it's a software package as well that, has set points for.
So these Texas utilities were just being cheap?
Yes, that's what it was. They didn't,
That's what it boils down to.
It's a, they once in every 10 years they may need it, but, so I guess they do an analysis, cost benefit, and they say, we don't need the cold weather package. We're in Texas. But, when they do, obviously you see what happens, yeah. So, yeah, the deregulation, I think, had a lot to do with it. Everywhere else in the country, runs under FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they have their ERCOT, and they're deregulated. So, basically that's what's going on.
So does the federal, and you're right, Texas decided that they didn't want federal regulation back in the 70s or maybe the early 80s, and they sealed off their grid from the rest of the country so that they wouldn't have to be regulated. Does the federal government regulations on wind turbines require cold weather packages in areas that can get cold weather?
I don't know if there's an actual regulation. I think, it's
just common sense.
It's just,
like there's no cure for stupid.
Sense.
That's the problem here.
Iowa, yeah, if you're in Iowa, you better get your cold weather packages, or that's part of it. Yeah, it's.
Well, it's like putting antifreeze in your car.
Regulation.
I grew up in Michigan. I lived in New Hampshire. I lived in Vermont. I spent most of my life in cold weather places. And you winterize your car when winter's coming. You put a little more antifreeze in there. You use a lighter grade of oil in your engine, I always used to use synthetic oils because they just didn't thicken. You can take them down to 50 below zero and they don't thicken up. But it's a little more expensive. But you can just get ready for the winter. I mean, this is just common sense. It's. And now they've got these guys on Fox News going, well, this is the Green New Deal is going to destroy America because you're all going to see your windmills freeze up because we're just assuming everybody in America is as stupid as Texas is. Doesn't know how to winterize a damn, windmill or wind turbine. I mean, it sounds like, Kurt, the bottom line is that's what you're saying, that's what's going on.
Yep, that's what I see.
Okay, as a turbine expert. Great. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate the call. Mike in Dickinson, North Dakota. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Basically, from what I see America no longer as a first world country. And I don't, the image I have in my mind of what a third world country is, I don't believe we're there either. But what would your definition be of a second world country, and is that what you think we are?
Well, the old first, second, third world country definitions used to be that the first world was, fully developed countries like the United States and Western Europe. The second world was the communist countries, the Soviet Union and China and Vietnam and like that. And then the third world countries were countries that were aspiring to be democracies or functional countries. Or not. Some of them called themselves communists, but they were just like deeply in poverty. And the assumption at the time, which turns out in retrospect to have been largely wrong, was that those second world countries were not in deep poverty. And as we found when the Soviet Union fell and people started, and East Germany fell, they really should have been classified as third world countries if you're using economics as the scale. But in any case, what has happened to the United States? Yeah, I don't disagree with you that I don't think that we could say that our entire country, that America as a whole has become a third world country, but Reaganomics and Republican policies have caused large parts of America to be functionally third world countries. You have rates of hookworm, a disease associated with poor sanitation. You have rates of hookworm in Louisiana that are worse than some third world countries. You have, there was a great piece about this in the New York Times a couple days ago. We have the per capita murder rate is the very highest in the United States, is in the former Confederate states. The places where you've got the most guns, you've got no health care. They have not expanded Medicare to this day. And, so you've got fewer people with access to Medicare. You've got the lowest minimum wages in the country. They're basically being run as little kingdoms for their political elites and their billionaire class, the Waltons in Arkansas and so on. And, the result is the destruction of any, and they fight labor unions like crazy, the destruction of any sort of middle class. And a middle class is what's necessary to make a first world country a first world country. So we've got large pockets of disaster in the United States, and then you've got parts of our cities where, where you've got large black populations that for, hundreds of years have suffered under open segregation and discrimination, and redlining and all kinds of other problems, and to this day are economically challenged as a consequence of just plain old good old-fashioned racism. I mean, there's no other way to call it. And you combine that with the neo-feudalist policies, the ways that these former Confederate states are being run, and it's a major crisis for the United States. Not so much in blue states, not so much in Massachusetts, not so much in New York, not so much in California, not so much in Oregon or Washington State. Blue states seem to be doing fairly well. But the red states are sinking deeper and deeper into poverty and worse and worse into childhood hunger, and they have infant mortality rates and death rates that are in many cases commensurate with third world countries, and put us at the very bottom of the 34 OECD countries. So yes, in summary, yes, absolutely right. Mike, thanks for the call. Albert in Honolulu. Hey, Albert, what's up?
Hi, how are you doing, Tom? How are things?
Good. What's on your mind?
Now, it's interesting you had Richard Wolff on, because I'm a writer myself. I'm not an economist, but I'm a writer. And last year, because I was on a couple of shows discussing the impact of the economy, American economy, and what's been exposed because of coronavirus. And I tend to look at it from a three-tier position historically. The first is Richard Nixon's removal of the U.S. from the Bretton Woods system. The second is in relation to the 1971 memo by Lewis Powell to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the third is the 1974 petrodollar deal. I see those three as sort of the triumvirate that have shaped the U.S. economy. And what we
I would
see
not disagree
in the
with you
U.S.
on any
economy. Go ahead.
Oh, I agree. You got 10 seconds to finish your thought, Albert.
Right. And so that's why I think why we're having this sort of high profit, low wage economy in the United States.
Yeah,
those are historical.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Lewis Powell laid it out, and certainly every Republican president since then, and Republican Congress has followed it. Albert, brilliant analysis. Thank you very much. We'll be back 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I would say the most arguable of Albert's three was Nixon in the 70s, but it's worth a discussion. And welcome back, Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
Bonjour, mon ami. It's a great day to be in America, is it not?
It is where there's power. It isn't where Ted Cruz
Well, see,
lives.
that is exactly what I want to bring up. It's like, Tom, we just have way too high expectations for Texas, because this is a place that, on average, has a couple of processing plant explosions per year, right?
Mm. Yeah.
That's it, man. That's just like... You don't mess with Texas. They're handling it. They're messing with themselves just fine.
Yeah, Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that that's an excellent point. And thank you very much for that call, Chaz. Alan in Massapequa, New York. Am I mangling that, Alan?
No, that's right, an old Indian name. And thank you, Tom.
Okay.
My point is, you often discuss changes made by Ronald Reagan, which resulted in a shift of income to the rich from the middle and working class. One change I have not heard discussed, but which I understand was made, was the elimination of a federal program, which I believe might have been started by Nixon, actually, that gave federal funds to counties and localities throughout the U.S. As localities would presumably have to replace these funds after that cut by increasing property taxes, they would therefore be shifting the tax burden from the more progressive income tax to the more regressive property tax, or else they cut services. I wanted to know, I really haven't heard, I read something about it, but I really haven't heard much. Is my understanding correct on this? And if it is there any studies or documentation that show that property taxes increased or local services were cut because of these changes? And if so, one could say, when it's always you hear conservatives belly aching about increased property taxes, but if what I'm saying is correct, perhaps it should be pointed out to them that it was Reagan's policy which helped accelerate that.
Well, there may be a specific policy or action with which I'm unfamiliar, but I think broadly speaking, Alan, what you're talking about is a process that the Republicans love called block granting. And that's where you say, okay, we're doing food stamps to the whole country. Well, actually, I'm not sure the food stamps is a good example. I don't know if they've been block granted, but let's just pretend that they were. Right. And so we're going to say, you, Alabama, last year got $50 million in food stamps. Instead, but from the federal government, it flowed right out of the federal government into the pockets of individual consumers. This year, we're just going to give $50 million to you as a state, as a block grant, and good luck. You distribute it as food stamps. And then what happens is the next Congress comes along and says, 50 million, let's make that 45 million. And they start dialing back on the amount of the block grants, or the block grants are not inflation adjusted. And, the inflation happens. And the consequence of that is that the state governments and all the local governments, to whom that money eventually goes, have to cut back on services. The specific areas where that's happening, I don't have right off the top of my head. There are some great articles about it, and I think if you search on block grants as your principal vehicle for finding this information, you'll be able to find it. And Alan, if you could find a good source, tweet it to me, would you? I'd love to have it.
Okay, I had trouble finding it, looking it up. I've kind of read about it without any details. But
yeah, I think block grants are the key to what you're looking for. Yep. I got to run, Alan. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. And it's about how FDR in 1944, in fact, January 44, in his State of the Union address, talked about how important it was to add rights to the Bill of Rights. The original Bill of Rights was all political rights. He said it's time to enshrine economic rights in our Constitution. I would add, like most of the governments of Europe have done. And this includes the right to housing, the right to food, the right to a good job that pays well, the right to an education, including a college education, and the right to health care. It's pretty powerful stuff. And frankly, I think that what this coronavirus crisis is proving is that we are all in this together, and that Reagan's thing about government is never going to help you was just a load of crap. And so you can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. 51 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Martin in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Martin, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were asking earlier for a way to, deal with these fake news things on like the right-wing media saying that wind turbines are failing and the Green New Deal is the reason Texans are dying. And I think probably the best way would be to follow the path set by Dominion voting machines.
Sue them?
Sue them. I mean, this is the only language that these people speak. It's their money. Sue them. I had a laugh when the Pillow Guy was on one of those shows, and he was going on about the Dominion machines after the lawsuits were filed, and they fell all over themselves trying to get him to shut up, and they finally cut him off. So the only way to do it.
They're suing him too.
Yeah, well, of course they're going to sue back, but they're the ones that did the damage because they're liable. You know, they respect corporations or people in America, right? Well, then a corporation has the right to sue somebody as an individual for libel and slander. I mean,
so here's the problem, Martin. I'm guessing. I mean, I'm not super familiar with the windmill situation in Texas, other than knowing that the western part of Texas is generating somewhere between 6 and 10% of all the power in the state, using wind power, and only a very small number of those windmills were not apparently winterized or shut down. But here's the problem. Any windmill manufacturer who wants to continue selling their products into Texas, if they were to sue Greg Abbott or the state of Texas or even Fox News for these god-awful lies that they're telling, they would probably lose their future contracts. Dominion Voting Machines, for that matter, I think is taking a big chance here, but they figured that they were on the line. There was so much pressure to get rid of all the voting machines, which is something that can be easily done in 1 year. It's a lot harder to get that kind of pressure to get rid of windmills, right? You can prevent new ones by blocking the Green New Deal, that kind of thing. But it seems like the cost-benefit ratio, the risk that Dominion took in the lawsuit, was minimal, and the rewards for them, that is being able to maintain their voting machines in the state of Georgia, was huge. Whereas the risk to the windmill manufacturers who are selling their products in Texas, and a lot of these are coming out of Iowa, out of big manufacturing plants in Iowa, that risk, it seems to me, is substantial, and their benefits might be small. Does that recalibrate your equation, Martin?
Yeah, well, I'd say the counter to that is simple, that how many contracts will they lose? Because, say, one other mostly red state is going to talk about putting in wind turbines, and they're going to fall back and, oh, well, look what happened to Texas. How much business will they lose because of the stories coming out of Texas? I think that,
that's a good point.
Like you said, the cost-benefit ratio, but we got to see what's going to cost them more in the long run, because if that lie is allowed to stand, it'll be used by people fighting windmills from now to eternity. I mean, saying that, birds flying into them, killing off the American eagle wasn't enough, or that the solar
that was
panels
Trump's lie.
were draining the sun. I mean, people believe that solar panels drain the sun.
I know. I remember when that was a thing back about 6 years ago on Fox News. It was insane. Or maybe it wasn't Fox News. It was in the right-wingosphere. Martin, you've brought me around to your way of thinking. And thanks for the suggestion. Hopefully, somebody working for one of these wind turbine companies is listening to the program right now. Johnny in San Marcos, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind? How are you doing? Are you in one of the places that lost their power, or are you back up?
We're back up, but it comes and it goes. But my thing about holding the Republicans responsible, we all know it's only two things. One is Citizens United, get it overturned. The other thing is the media, because they followed the Berlusconi effect, didn't they?
Yeah, Berlusconi was a media billionaire in Italy. He owned most of the newspapers and all of the television stations of any consequence in Italy, and then he ran for prime minister and won because, hey, all the media was talking about what a wonderful guy he was, and he was just, a little more charming version of Donald Trump. His bunga parties and everything else. Go ahead.
That's what they've done. They followed, Berlusconi.
Yeah. Well, this was part of the plan that Lewis Powell laid out. We've got to get control of the colleges. We've got, billionaires and right-wing think tanks have to be funding college professors in history, economics, and political science, which is happening in over 200 colleges and universities in the United States right now. We have to get control of the media. We need to encourage our wealthy people to actually buy media properties. That has happened. We need to get control of the court system. We need to create an organization that can vet right-wing lawyers and pump them into the federal courts. That happened. It was the Federalist Society. It was created in the early 1980s as a result of the Powell memo. I mean, you could just go down the list and tick every box. Right. We need to get control of the politics. We need to build think tanks so that we can control public opinion. Now those think tanks are doing everything from subtly rewriting Wikipedia entries to openly running right-wing websites that pretend to be news. It's crazy. It's crazy. Johnny, thank you. We'll be back. We're going to do a deep dive over the next hour into what's going on in China. A remarkable new book just published. And I think this is a lesson for the entire world and a conversation that the world needs to be having. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teef, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teefhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it's no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
We say fight back!
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us is Amelia Pang. Amelia is a journalist of Uyghur descent, the author of a new book, Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's cheap goods. I just have to say first, I read this op-ed in the New York Times that Amelia wrote on January 10th titled, "It Took a Genocide for Me to Remember My Uyghur Roots." And let me recommend it to you. And this book, Made in China, it's remarkable. Amelia Pang, AmeliaPang.com is Amelia's website. You can tweet her at AmeliaPangG. And Amelia, welcome to the program. I'm so glad you could join us today for a lengthy interview. This is our Conversations with Great Minds hour here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it.
So, Amelia, let's start at the beginning. Or maybe it's not the beginning, but here's a quote here. The handwritten note found in a box of decorations purchased from an Oregon Kmart read, "If you occasionally buy this product, please kindly resend this letter to the World Human Rights Organization. Thousands of people here who are under the persecution of the Chinese Communist Party government will thank and remember you." Tell us about the story behind that note.
Yes, it was written by a political prisoner in China. He happened to practice Falun Gong, which is a group that is banned in China. China says it's a cult, but they also do have an extremely great ability to organize large protests and any kind of mass organizing, and like that is very frightening to authoritarian regimes. But Falun Gong is definitely not the only group that is ending up in these types of labor camps, making our cheap goods. There's, like you mentioned earlier, the Uyghurs, ethnic minorities, and Tibetans, and there are other types of Chinese dissidents, like pro-democracy activists, civil rights warriors, these people, women's rights activists. A lot of these people are taking a very brave stand against an authoritarian regime, and unfortunately, many of them do end up in labor camps making our useless cheap goods. And many of them are quite trivial, such as Halloween decorations.
Yeah. You tell a story, I believe, about the paper mushrooms. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. One of the products they were manufacturing in this particular labor camp in Liaoning, China, where this note was written, was these decorative paper mushrooms, and the particular product where the note was snuck in were these styrofoam gravestones that were really cheaply made, but they were made under really horrendous conditions. The prisoners had to work 15 to 20 hours a day. They were often tortured, and if they didn't work fast enough to meet the quota that the labor camp needed to meet to satisfy our corporation's demand, and for how fast these products and how cheaply made these products are. And so ultimately my book is about tying our consumption habits and the failures of our corporations to properly audit their Chinese suppliers, to directly contributing to the rise and expansion of these labor camps.
This is not something radical or new in China, it seems to me. I spent the month of November in 1987 in the Beijing International Acupuncture Teaching Hospital and learning acupuncture. And, walked all over Beijing. And one of the things I noticed was that everywhere I went, particularly when I was with any of the physicians from that hospital who were teaching me this, there were people following us. And this was before any American goods ever being made in China. In fact, this was before Tiananmen Square. How far back does this, or what is the grounding of this authoritarian ideology? Was that something that just came out of the Cultural Revolution? Is that something that goes back a long way? Is there any foundation for this kind of, paranoid neo-feudalism? Well, you give it a name. I don't know what the name is for it. But is there any foundation for that in Confucian thought or Buddhist thought or or anything that's part of the heritage of China?
Well, corvée labor certainly existed in ancient China, as it did in many parts of the world. There were forced laborers who built the Great Wall. A lot of these government projects were used by essentially slave labor. But this kind of mass detaining of political dissidents for the use of their labor and the silencing of that really started to rise in the 1930s as the self-defined Chinese Communist Party was gaining control and building momentum and capturing more areas. And these earliest Laogai camps, as they're called, the earliest forms of them were really based off of Soviet gulags. So they're pretty horrendous facilities where there's a lot of torture, a heavy basis on political brainwashing of dissidents or just innocent people just to create fear and keep people in line. And these types of camps have only expanded and grown since the 1930s, and in a lot of cases the torture has gotten worse.
How does the government maintain its legitimacy in the face of that?
I think in the party that control the media is state-owned, so you don't really hear a lot of alternative reporting or news getting into China. You have to, if you want to access that kind of news, you have to go to great lengths to download a VPN, but that could be really risky. You could land in prison for a labor camp yourself, or using a VPN that's not registered with the state. So it's very, very difficult for a large amount of Chinese people domestically to access uncensored information. So the way that the Chinese government portrays labor camps is just a prison. It's no different from American prisons per se. And while American prisons do have a lot of serious problems, and it's not wide, the scope of the labor and the torturous conditions of the labor, you cannot really compare the two.
Because it's just industrial strength. I mean, there's some god-awful labor camps in the United States. I mean, slavery is still legal in the United States if you've been convicted of a crime under the 13th Amendment.
Yes.
You look at some of these southern states, and it's pretty gruesome, but China, is it a matter of scale, or is there's also a difference of actual technique?
I would say it's a matter of scale mainly. Shane Bauer from Mother Jones wrote a great book called American Prison, which covers the forced labor system in American prisons. And according what he found was that, yes, back in the day, a lot of our prisons really did operate like labor camps in terms of direct connections with corporations. But unfortunately, ever since the war on drugs, and prisoners in the U.S., there's now not enough jobs for all of them. So the scale, the amount of the people that are actually working in prisons, you can't compare to China. In China, everyone pretty much is doing manufacturing.
I got it. We're talking to Amelia Pang in our Conversations with Great Minds. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Amelia is the author of a new book, Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. We'll be right back. And welcome back. So, Amelia, give us a thumbnail sketch of how again, back to my time in 1987, I remember this one physician telling me he said the 19th century was the European century, the 20th century was the American century, the 21st century will be the Chinese century. That was, and again, this was a year or two before Tiananmen Square. And yet it is. It seems very much that China has surpassed the United States in many ways, economically, and is fixing to significantly surpass the United States. Where and when did that process begin, and how?
Well, China's opening up its economies in the 1980s really contributed to that. It has surpassed the United States in a lot of areas, but also in bad areas, including income inequality. China has the largest number of billionaires in the world compared to any country, and yet you also have rural villagers who are so poor that they have to live in mud huts, and their children cannot really go to school because they have to work in the fields. It's just the disparity is very high.
Mm-hmm. And this is the result of tax policy? I mean, here in the United States, we can track the rise of the shift in wealth from the American middle class to the billionaire class. Ronald Reagan's massive tax cuts, which have been repeated by 2 Republican presidents since then. And every time we get tax cuts, we get these, transfers of wealth from working people and poor people into the pockets of the top 1%. What's the process in China by which that happens?
Even though they call themselves a communist party, there's really a lack of good social welfare programs actually helping the poor. It's very difficult to access medical care or to really move up the social ladder. But economically, I do want to talk about trade. In my book, I do cover how both establishment parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, historically have failed to address human rights during trade deals. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 under the Clinton administration, human rights wasn't really a talking point. And, when Trump had the trade war with China and trade negotiations, again, human rights was not really a talking point. And when human rights or labor rights are not a talking point in these kinds of trade negotiations, then you do see a rise in just massive income inequality.
Is there a specific part of or dimension of human rights that we should be raising more frequently?
Well, currently, we should be addressing the Xinjiang issue, where a large number of the Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities are detained and being forced to labor in places that are, they're making all kinds of products for us. They're manufacturing the raw materials for solar panels. Right. They're even working in cotton fields. And we're still...
Let's do a deep dive on that when we come back from this break. We're talking with Amelia Pang, AmeliaPang.com. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. So we've had a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for the folks who support our program. It's about 2 people you probably never heard of, Isabel Cairo and Jay Sim. They are economists with the Federal Reserve. And they just came out with this extraordinary new paper. It was actually published by the Fed, in which they point out that most of the economic crises and problems that we're experiencing in the United States, going back to the 1980s, the stagnation in wages, the actual drop in wages, the stagnation in household income as more and more people in households are working, the explosion in the net worth of the top 5% of households, things that are driving, credit bubbles and other, stock bubbles and things like this. A dramatic amount of that was the result of monopoly power, corporate monopoly power, and about half of that could have been eliminated if we simply taxed unearned income. It's amazing. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back for our Conversations with Great Minds today. We're talking with Amelia Pang, a journalist of Uyghur descent, the author of Made in China, Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. AmeliaPang.com, the website, AmeliaPang, P-A-N-G-G, the Twitter handle. The book, of course, Made in China. Amelia, we were just a second ago talking about how even Bill Clinton didn't raise the issue of human rights when bringing China into the World Trade Organization. And how American corporations are essentially complicit in this. Can you talk about American goods that are being made in China under these brutal conditions versus perhaps American goods? You've got Apple insisting, no, everything's fine. People aren't committing suicide at Foxconn. What is the reality here? How big is this issue? How much of what China is making for the American market is being done in ways that, were it done in the United States, we would all be, I think, justifiably horrified?
Right. Apple's Foxconn factories the actual conditions there are pretty disturbing. Believe it or not, the labor camps are even worse, and it's very easy for a factory, a normal factory, an official supplier like Foxconn, to secretly subcontract work to a labor camp. And what we're finding is a lot of all kinds of goods are from these forced labor facilities are entering to U.S. markets. Everything from the raw materials to make solar panels, to human hair extensions, to PPE equipment, and a lot of the cotton that is, although that was recently banned, which is a positive step. But, it's really an extremely wide range of products. I don't know what I could safely say isn't made or partly made in a labor camp.
So how do we, how is an American consumer to know? And is this something that should be dealt with at the level of things like consumer boycotts, or is this something that really needs to be addressed systemically at the level of U.S. government policy and specifically trade policy? And if so, how?
I think both. In terms of what consumers can do, we really need to create a cultural shift in the way that we consume these cheap goods, or sometimes even expensive goods, and create that kind of next level of transparency and sustainability. A lot of the today, there's marketing buzzwords like sustainability, transparency, ethically sourced, but those terms are essentially meaningless for a lot of these companies who have branded themselves around these terms. If you go to their websites and you look at their sustainability page or their corporate social responsibility page, a lot of times those pages say actually very little about how they're sourcing with their factories, what their relationships with their factories are actually like, and what are the actual conditions in their factories, and what have they found in their audit reports, what do they look for in their audit reports. Those details are rarely revealed. So I would say what consumers can do, my book does cover this, is the next time you go shopping online at your favorite brand store, just take a moment and look at their sustainability page or equivalent to that page, and see if they're mentioning how they're actually auditing these factories, if they're actually doing enough to find out what the real conditions are like in the factory, or if they're contributing to any factors that may be deeply encouraging the factory to outsource work to labor camps. And if you don't, and my book does cover exactly what are the key things you should be looking for. And if the company isn't revealing them, then you can call them out on social media. Go on Facebook, go on Twitter, and start asking them to.
What are
for instance, during my research, I found that a lot of the times the reason why a regular factory like Foxconn, although I'm not specifically talking about Foxconn, why they're outsourcing work to forced labor camps instead of having them made in-house or at another regular factory that is approved, that is an approved subcontractor. The reason why is because the price that our corporation gave them to offer to pay for the products was so cheap. Even if they are charging a lot of prices for consumers to pay, the actual price that the corporation is offering these factories is so low that these factories cannot realistically make them for that cheap of a price. You know, we have all these so-called standards for factories to not use prison labor, for there to be no child labor, for a factory to follow environmental codes. But a lot of our corporations are actually setting up our factories to fail and not successfully following the code.
Remarkable stuff. We'll continue the conversation on the other side of this break. We're talking with Amelia Pang, our Conversations with Great Minds today, the author of Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. I want to find out how some of these American companies are responding, and also who are the Uyghurs and what's going on with that whole
You're
situation.
listening
We'll
to
be
the
back.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Amelia's book is Made in China. Her website is Amelia Pang, Pang.com, and her Twitter handle, Amelia Pang, with an extra G on the end, Pangg.
It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Press reached out to a bunch of folks, me, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi David Wolpe, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chuck Colson, Neil Donald Walsh, and asked for thoughts about a spiritual response to the attack on America. The result was a book, From the Ashes. And this is from the chapter that I wrote, The Goddess of Democracy, a Sacred Archetype to Heal the World. People argue that the terrorist attacks against the United States reflect a war between one religion and another, or between the poor and rich of the world. While there may be an element of truth to each, I'd suggest that the real war here is between the 11th century and the 21st century. And while our leaders, and until our leaders figure that out, we may miss some great opportunities. Back in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled Europe. Women were often forbidden to go out in public unless properly covered, and were explicitly the property of men. Justice was swift and severe, ranging from disfigurement to torture to death in horrific ways, and most often meted out with the approval or supervision of clerics. The power behind the power of all the royal families of Europe was the Pope. On November 27, 1095, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches to the Council of Clermont in France, calling for a holy war against Islam to unite factious Europe. Dr. E.L. Skip Knox of Boise State University in Idaho summarized the Pope's speech. The noble race of Franks must come to the aid of their fellow Christians in the East. The infidel Turks are advancing into the heart of Eastern Christendom. Christians are being oppressed and attacked. Churches and holy places are being defiled. Jerusalem is groaning under the Saracen yoke. The Holy Sepulchre is in Muslim hands and has been turned into a mosque. The Franks must stop their internal wars and squabbles. Let them go instead against the infidel and fight a righteous war. God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Thus began a war between two different medieval cultures, 11th century Catholic and 11th century Muslim. Over the next few centuries, the Catholics, with their battle cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, were often victorious against the Muslims. The only crime defined by the Pope was that they were living in the Holy Land of the Catholic Church. Medieval historian Raymond of Aguilles wrote the following eyewitness account of the attack and seizure of Jerusalem in 1099 by the triumphant Christian Crusaders. Quote, some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hand, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins." End of quote. In the 900 or so years since the early Crusades, both Christianity and Islam have undergone profound changes. The Protestant Reformation shook Christianity to its core, and the Renaissance in Europe wrought huge transformations in both Christianity and Judaism. Perhaps the most critical change came about in the 18th century when Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and others synthesized the highest ideals of Greek, Roman, and Iroquois thought and culture to create the United States of America. They ignited the flame of liberty, bringing into the world an archetype that to this day inspires hope worldwide. As America grew and our ideas of Republican democracy spread around the world, further transformations of the world took place. Another turning point was when modern science challenged the medieval worldview of the church in the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Although Clarence Darrow lost that case, its widespread publicity began a dramatic and lasting process of change across the world. The American dream is a powerful and pervasive force in the world, even if the sometimes imperialistic behavior of our transnational corporations is often at odds with our own ideals. That dream has wafted over the entire world and is still so powerful that people are willing to die for it. In China, the Tiananmen Square protesters marched to their doom in 1989, carrying a 37-foot-tall papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty, which they had renamed the Goddess of Democracy. Of course, there are still pockets of medieval perspective in the Christian world. The post-disaster comments of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who said they had just witnessed the wrath of their God, who had lifted the veil and allowed the terrorists to act because of their God's anger over homosexuals, liberals, and the ACLU, reveals that such a worldview is still alive and well in a small fringe of Christianity. Some Christians are still today willing to commit terrorist acts of murder or mass murder. Timothy McVeigh and those who murdered numerous abortion providers all claim their acts are grounded in Christianity and biblical teachings. And just as 21st century Christianity still has its own pockets of medieval worldview, so does 21st century Islam. To how these reformations happen, and what we hope to see in among those right-wing crazies in Islam. The book is From the Ashes: A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in 2018, Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, bought Monsanto, the American chemical and pesticide company, and God only knows what else, seeds and whatnot. Anyhow, Bayer bought them for $63 billion. Bayer just very recently set aside $10 billion to cover the cost of consumers, people in their homes, who bought Roundup and got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, from Roundup, this product that Monsanto makes that Bayer now is responsible for. $10 billion. The kicker is that the home use of Roundup only represents about 10% of Monsanto's sales of this product, glyphosate. It's amazing. There's a whole video about this for the people who support our program over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out over there. Welcome back. We're talking with Amelia Pang, the author of a new book, Made in China, an SOS letter and the cost of America's cheap goods. Her website, ameliapang.com, her Twitter handle, Amelia Pang, P-A-N-G-G, and the book, of course, Made in China. Amelia, I wanted to kind of, for people who are really unfamiliar with the situation in China with regard to ethnic minorities and religious minorities and whatnot, can you give us a kind of broad scope view? I mean, who are the Uyghurs? Who are the, what does Han Chinese mean? how is Chinese society essentially organized and categorized, and how does that all work in the context of economics, politics, and ultimately repression?
Yes, the Chinese government has been very much trying to create a single state race in order to create this kind of national unity. And while that may not sound so bad, but in reality, how the policies affect people on the ground is that if you are not Chinese, what people normally think of as Chinese, not just the Han majority, you have a very difficult life in China. Right now we're talking about the Uyghurs. They're a Turkic minority group with darker skin, with very, very different facial features from Han Chinese people, and they historically have had difficulty finding employment. They face a lot of discrimination in various ways. But in recent years, the living conditions of the Uyghurs have gotten a lot worse, and that is closely tied with trade, because there's just been a mass rounding up of Uyghurs based solely on their ethnicity, and putting them in labor camps, and they're essentially pretty much making our cheap and sometimes expensive goods.
Yeah, you said that they're trying to create a single race across China. I mean, this in order to create national unity. That, of course, was Adolf Hitler's big idea as well. And I understand that there's actually, not only are they putting Uyghurs in prison camps and other minorities, and I'm curious who those other minorities are, but also there is a campaign of forced sterilization and birth control. Do I have that right?
Yes. Actually, the U.S. government has called what's happening to the Uyghurs a genocide, because that does meet the UN's one of the UN's definitions of genocide, which is suppression of birth. China's forced abortions and massive amounts of forced sterilization in these camps and even outside of the camps has caused, I believe, an 84% decline in birth rates in two of the largest Uyghur prefectures in China, two of the largest Uyghur majority areas, and so yeah, it's not just about. It's no longer an issue of cultural genocide. The amount of Uyghurs who are being born has literally coming to a halt.
That's pretty remarkable. We're talking with Amelia Pang in our Conversations with the Great Minds today, the author of Made in China, a new book out. And Amelia, part of your book is a little autobiographical. Would you care to share with our audience how you came to this understanding, how this all came to your attention, how this concern became significant enough for you that you thought it was worth doing the research and all the hard work and writing a book about?
Yes, my New York Times essay was autobiographical about how my family lost their Uyghur heritage. Even though we are Han Chinese mixed with Uyghur, it is just so difficult to identify as Uyghur in China. But the book is not actually autobiographical. It's more about the different types of people who are their stories, the people who are actually detained and working in the labor camps currently.
Is there a particular story that you'd like to share from the book?
Yes. So while a lot of the book is about supply chains and corporate complicity, I did want to tell a human story to make so that people actually read it and find it not so heavy. It does follow one forced labor story predominantly. His name is Suni, and he was a really intelligent person, He went to college. He during the 80s, he went to college, and when China was opening up, and he became very interested in Western philosophy, like Hegel. I really try to show like the process of how he turned into, from someone that once contemplated Hegel, into this mechanism in a labor camp, just doing repetitive actions, making our cheap goods, and cheap and trivial goods. And how he was actually not Uyghur; he was Han Chinese, but he was a political dissident, and he just how emotionally and spiritually he died before his physical body fully deteriorated. And you know, he was not so different from you and I. He had dreams. He had a wife that he loved deeply, and this like really moving love story of how they ended up together against all odds. So my book is ultimately about really the human cost of our cheap goods and the actionable steps that we can take as consumers to address this.
How did Sun Yi's life end?
He did manage to leave the labor camp, and he tried to escape to another country and restart a new life there. But unfortunately, his health was quite poor, and he had many health problems due to just all the torture and starvation and lack of access to medical care that he experienced during his years imprisoned.
How have American companies responded to the revelations in your book?
They have not provided much meaningful response. For instance, a meaningful legislation, if it passed, that could actually push the Chinese government to rethink its policies towards Uyghurs, is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And it's currently stalling in Congress at the moment, although the Senate has taken it up again. What that would do is it would ban all products coming from Xinjiang, and not just some products or certain kinds of products like the cotton and tomato products that are currently banned. It would ban everything, and that is a huge blow to China trade-wise, because China has invested a lot of money into building up Xinjiang as a key transportation hub for China's Belt and Road policy, which is a $1 trillion economic strategy. It's really too big to fail in China's eyes. And so taking a significant kind of trade away from China could really, really push China to revisit these policies. But unfortunately, our corporations like Apple and Nike they're lobbying Congress to not get this passed or to significantly revise the legislation. Apple alone spent $90,000 lobbying to not get this specific legislation passed. So although our corporations may release press releases that say they have dropped specific suppliers that are using Uyghur forced labor, in reality, they are, still spending a lot of money so the government will allow them to continue to use Uyghur forced labor.
We're talking with Amelia Pang, author of Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You can tweet Amelia at AmeliaPangG, and AmeliaPang.com is her website. The book, Made in China. Amelia, what are the political dynamics of the anti-Uyghur forced labor goods into the United States legislation that you identified before? Is this partisan, or is this purely, which corporations own which politicians? How can people who are listening who might want to see that passed participate in helping that pass? What's going on with this?
It's supposed to be bipartisan. I mean, nobody wants to be supporting forced labor, but it passed in the House with strong bipartisan support. I'm sorry, it's supposed to be bipartisan. It passed in the House with strong bipartisan support, but unfortunately, after it passed in the House, maybe the legislators knew that they didn't actually want this to go much further, and it hasn't really been moved forward in the Senate in a significant way. And you do have companies like Apple, Nike, and Coca-Cola spending large amounts of money lobbying legislators to heavily revise this legislation or not get it passed at all. Apple alone spent $90,000 lobbying this legislation alone.
We're having kind of an awakening in America. The 1619 Project, I think, is kind of a high watermark of people, in particular white people in the United States, waking up to the genuine horrors of slavery in the United States and how extensive the American economy depended on slave labor in order to operate. Is there a way to translate that horror? I mean, we're now decrying slave labor in the United States, and yet we seem to be condoning it in China. Do you see a movement to to conflate those two? Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat here.
Excuse me, so do I. Yes, that horror, it's a valid horror, and it absolutely needs to translate to the Uyghur slave labor that's happening in China today. A lot of the Uyghurs in Fortune and Xinjiang have to work in cotton fields. That there's definitely some disturbing parallels to African American slave labor, although not the same, and very different historical context. But I just want to go back to how this is still the slave labor of the Uyghurs and beyond the Uyghurs, of all different types of ethnic minorities and political dissidents, are vastly contributing to trade. Although Trump's trade war started in 2018, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the U.S. was still the fastest growing export market for the Uyghur region between April 2019 and April 2020. The export in that region grew by more than 25% in terms of exports that went to the U.S. Although the U.S. has kind of presented itself as a China hawk, in reality, we are still buying a lot of goods made by literally slave labor in Xinjiang.
Remarkable, remarkable. We'll be back with more of our conversation with Amelia Pang, author of the new book, Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods, right after this. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So if you are a middle class, working class, whatever you want to call it, person in the United States, and you own your own home, which is, I believe, a little over 60% of American families, every year you pay a wealth tax. You pay a tax on what is, for the vast majority of Americans, their largest single asset, your single largest asset, your home. It's called a property tax, but it's a tax you pay on wealth every year. You got a house worth $100,000, you pay a 1% property tax, you're going to pay $1,000 a year, whatever it may be. I mean, and property tax is very typically higher than 1%. So why is it that if working class people are paying a wealth tax every year on their principal assets, why aren't billionaires paying a tax on their principal assets? Well, California's fixing to change that, or maybe, and I've got a piece up over at thomhartmann.com about it. You can check it out. South Dakota, excuse me. We're talking with Amelia Pang about her new book, Made in China, a remarkable insight. And we were talking about how Americans are quick to decry the horrors of slave labor when it happens here in the United States. And obviously there are a lot of differences between the kind of chattel slavery that was practiced here and what's going on in China. But we're perfectly willing to purchase all kinds of stuff made by slave labor in China and presumably in other countries as well. We're specifically talking about China here. I saw a piece in the Financial Times earlier this week saying that it's widely believed that Europe has now surpassed the United States as an export market for China. I can't confirm that, but to what extent is Europe responding to these kinds of things? And is it a whole of the European Union response, or do we see country by country responses, or is not much happening?
Different responses country by country. Some are doing better than others, but for the most part, the European trade deals have not really touched on human rights either in any kind of meaningful way. And yes, regardless of where China is exporting these products, with the state of globalization today, it almost doesn't matter. China could be exporting a product to Europe, but then Europe can export it to the U.S. But what matters is that there is hard evidence that products made are being exported to people like us. When I was doing my research in China, I visited labor camps who had innocent names like pre-trial detention centers and drug detox centers, but they were essentially labor camps. I went to the sites. I spoke to the guards who confirmed there were prisoners inside doing manufacturing work. And I told them I was from an overseas company that wanted to buy products from them. And the guards at the camp said, yes, absolutely, we can send you products and make products for you. No problem. I spent a lot of time following the trucks that left these camps to see exactly which exporters they were working with. And they were working with all kinds of exporters, from pet products like the nylon pet collars to even an Apple supplier, an official Apple supplier. When you look up the addresses of these factories and when you look at the customs records that show exactly what these products were sending and where, they were going all over the world, even ones that were going to Taiwan. Sometimes they ultimately end up going to the U.S. and said, said this is made in Taiwan, even though there were definitely parts of it manufactured in China. And so these products are ending up in our stores, regardless of if we're mostly the ones that China is being exporting to the U.S. or not.
We're down to about a minute and a half here. The story of a Saudi, Mr. Khashoggi, being murdered by Saudi Arabia, even though he'd lived in the United States, is kind of well known. An example of state retribution against a whistleblower. Are you on the receiving end of problems as a consequence of writing this book about China?
I think China, unfortunately, is a very different country from Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of foreign correspondents and journalists in China who are uncovering these types of scenarios. And as long as you are not a Chinese national, you do have a lot of protections when it comes to China. I mean, you do face risk. You can get arrested, and that often does happen to journalists. You can get beat up when you are arrested. You can get detained, and they try to scare you and waste your time. And you can get kicked out of the country. But so far, we haven't seen from foreign journalists getting executed, but it certainly does happen to the domestic journalists.
Right. And in our last minute, is the for the folks in Hong Kong who are protesting the suppression of human rights in Hong Kong, are they going directly to labor camps, or are they going to prison? I mean, is this just more fodder for this industry?
I would say it is more fodder for the industry, whether somebody is sentenced or not. Pre-trial detention centers are often manufacturing facilities where people can be held indefinitely without even having gone through a trial. And people who go through trial are going to prisons where the conditions are pretty horrific, and everybody has to do manufacturing work for 20 hours a day sometimes, So, yes, the citizens of Hong Kong are very much in danger of becoming forced laborers who make our goods.
Amazing. Amelia Pang, the book is Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. Amelia, thank you for dropping by today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I wish you the very best with your book. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.